All right, if you watched the last video, we talked a little bit about hardware and circuits, and I didn't get in depth into it at all. I kind of just wanted to open the door for you so that you had some very simple places to go and some simple applications to open that door to what's going on in your micro signal flow, and to be able to see your signal flow from a micro view, to give you a lot better understanding of what might be happening in your processing, to really help you streamline what's going on in your processing, to save you time, to save you money, to save you, trying to, frustration in trying to understand what's happening, because you have a much finer understanding of the real micro signal flow processes that are happening throughout your entire system of whatever type of production you're doing. And this video, we're going to talk just a little bit about software processing. And I say software processing because the way that I look at it is it's like circuits that have been turned into words, so with lack of better way to express that, it's kind of, how I look at it. And that understanding can be very complex. So I'm going to address this. Hopefully I don't ramble on too much, but it's along the same lines of what I was trying to say in the last video, that there are plenty of applications. My first suggestion, if you understand those circuits a little bit, is to dig around on the internet and see if you can find some examples for code. Simple circuits, simple limiters, simple compressors, distortion, things like that, and some coding for that, to really just kind of see what's happening with that. And you might want to read about the coding a little bit yourself in some of your spare time, and get just, a basic understanding of what might be happening there. And an example of that is that, the whole issue of that is, let's say you've got, processors. You've got this hardware compressor, and you've been reading about the circuits and playing with those tools that I showed you. You even got some more advanced tools and spent a couple bucks, and you really understand the audio engineering of it, or you don't. You got a basic concept of it, and you've messed around. You've got some understanding of what's happening. The more you play with it, and the more you read about it and experiment with it, the better that you'll understand it. And the coding the same way. But as you look at those processors, that on the inside, that you can get on the internet with the hardware and find examples all over the internet of limiters, compressors, all kinds of things that you can throw in some of those applications and experiment around with and see what's really happening. Sometimes the coding can be a little bit different, because it's not like it can get in there and go and test the resistor in it or something like that. So it can be a little bit more complex. But the issue is real simple, that, say that you want to, as you streamline your production and what you're using, so that you're not spending a lot of money and you're not wasting a lot of your time investigating things that you don't need to because of your understanding of your signal flow and what's happening in the signal processing, that some basic understandings of this kind of stuff also can really help you. So when you see new plugins or this or that, distortion plugins are a prime example. There's thousands of them. And it's like, there's only so many things you can do with distortion. There's, you distort a sinusoid, or you add other harmonics, to it to cause distortion. Or you add noise to it, different types of noise that are, intermodulation distortion, which you're probably not going to want to buy a plugin that does that anyway. Aliasing distortion, which you probably aren't going to buy a plugin that does that anyway, for any reason I can think of. So the actual concept is pretty simple. And if you understand the concept, and if you watch some of the videos that I've made about some of the simple applications for creating distortion saturation, how you want it done, that there you can take that to a whole nother level with a little bit of understanding of coding. Taking something into something like Visual Studio, and building your own, very simple plugin, maybe spending a couple bucks on a GUI face or some colors, from the internet. They aren't probably going to cost you too much, and get something that really does some cool stuff for distortion with you, for your saturation, that's very controllable, does what you want it to do with your understanding of what distortion is and how it can how you manipulate it and what its uses are, rather than whether it's other distortion pedal, or you've got this this other you know, analog simulation, you know, thing for some type of mix desk, you know, that, from, it clipping a little bit, but got this saturation sound that, you can create that with a plugin real simply. And the other understanding is that with a little bit better understanding of those concepts and what's happening there, that you can, when you go to analyze a plugin or what's happening in your signal processing, that you can get a much better understanding of what might be happening there, so that you're looking at something and you're going, well, I got a pretty good understanding from understanding some of the circuitry, that how that's going to be going into code, what it's trying to emulate, and looking at the code, is it doing that? When it's coming out, is it causing that? When I'm looking at it, I can go back and throw that in code or something and get a much better understanding of what's coming out the other end of the plugin, and if it's doing anything that it says it's going to do, or if it's garbage, or a waste of money and a waste of time, and those two things in themselves are invaluable, saving yourself those. And plus, it just gives you a lot better micro view of your signal flow, so that you can have a much better understanding of what's happening to your signal. Because it's really simple. It's emulating something just like an analog circuitry. If you've made some piece of code and there's a signal going into it, something's happening inside of it before it comes out. And when you're looking at a plugin, a lot of times you get to see nothing that's going on under the hood. And how it might have been compiled and put together, and what the code was and how well they put the code together, can really give you a better understanding of what's going on in that signal processing. And that can get a little bit in depth, but just a basic understanding of it, that way when you're looking at the plugin and you're looking at what's going on in your virtual studio, that it's not magical anymore, and you've got some understanding of what's happening there. Like if you've looked at the circuits and you understand a much better micro view of your signal flow there, that none of that stuff is magical. You're looking at your microphone, everything from your interface to the plugins in your DAW, and you've got a much better understanding of what could be happening there and what is happening in your signal, and whether or not that's good or bad. And the bottom line for that is that in signal processing, that it's going to really help you, fine tune and streamline your signal processing equipment and needs. You will find yourself probably a lot less trying to go out and buy this new piece of hardware, this new piece of software, this new plugin, or anything like that, because you don't need it. You're going, well, I got a good idea what that does, and with this plugin and that plugin, that's kind of cool, but that's, I don't have a need for that. And this is why, because I know what it's doing to the signal. I understand the signal flow through that processor or through that software or through that code. And I got a good idea of what it's trying to do, and whether or not I really think it's something I can really use in my production. But it will really help you streamline the tools that you use with a better understanding. That way, when you make purchases or you make decisions about what you want or need, that you've got a much better understanding of what you're going to use that for and why you're going to use that for, and to buy the piece of equipment or software that's going to be best suited to get done what you want to do, rather than, Bob's got that, so I must need that. You know what I'm saying? And that can happen, and it'll save you a lot of time of that, Bob and that produces Yafinka, and then just some superstar prop models come out with this new plugin, and you're like, whoa, dude. And it's like, well, bro, it's like, I know I don't need that plugin, bro, and it's like, I don't want it that simplified anyway, because I don't know what your plugin's actually doing. You were saying you're kicking up the bass end or something, but you don't explain anything about that. I ain't got the code. I don't know what that circuit's doing. I got no understanding what that's doing. I'm just going to mess around on it and see what it's doing, rather than approaching it from the other angle of what do you want to do with that bass drum. A simple example. What do you want to do? You're trying to get punch out of it. You're going to try to do this. You're going to try to do that. How can I do that and stream my, signal processing down with a much more intuitive understanding of what's happening in the signal processing, without going, well, I turn this knob and it kind of does that. With all due respect, that can get you caught in some things that can be cool sometimes, but sometimes, it's better to have some understanding of what's happening, that way that you're very, got a very good production with a very knowledgeable production and doing things in a way that is very, you know, don't want to say mathematical to scare you off, but, you know, that type of concept that you don't put 2 after 1 because Bob said so. You put 2 after 1 because you know what's happening in that complex waveform. You know what that's going to do mixed with the other waveforms, and you know what that's going to do with that reverberation with that type of impulse response on it and how that's going to mix together because you know exactly what's happening there. And it's like, and you've really fine-tuned your production and your signal processing with those understandings. So, like I said, there's lots of things you can dig around on the internet, you know, and, you know, here's a piece of code this guy put together for a stereo widener, you know, and it's like from here to there. That's it, bro. That's the, and you can build that plugin. You know, I mean, that's it. He's got a website to build it. Now, that's not even a dang paragraph, guy. But, you know, sometimes it's not that simple. And I don't know if that plugin's any good or not. I don't know that it's probably not a revelation in the audio engineering industry, but it's, you know, it probably does something. There's no doubt about it, you know, and just his understanding of that he's going to go get a new stereo widener plugin. And, you know, if you're testing it and you got a little bit better understanding of what it's doing, that sometimes it can be very simple, you know, sometimes it can be real complex, but sometimes it can be very simple and very helpful and, you know, and very intuitive to help you streamline, you know, your production with your signal processing with a much better understanding of what's happening so that, you know, that it's a better production because everything you did was for a purpose. It had nothing to do with turning a knob because Bob said so, or it does this a little bit. You know exactly why you did that, why you used that, and why you put that together, because you know exactly what's happening to the signal through your signal flow and why you're putting it through that next processor. Exactly why. You know exactly what it's going to do to that signal and why you're doing that signal. And, you know, from all the way from the time that you've recorded it to the time it's mastered, every processor that's hit that signal in your signal flow, why that's happened with very specific purposes in mind, with very finite, with very accurate and micro understandings of why you'd want to do that to that signal during your processing in your audio production. So I hope that opened up some doors. There's all kinds of places you can go. Like I said, Visual Studio is a cool, you know, you can build plugins in like Visual Studio Blend. You can download Octave here, you know, and it's a free mathematical laboratory with some signal processing in it. And it certainly wouldn't hurt you to read it a little bit and get a little bit better understanding of that. And you know, that, you know, with your understanding of the circuitry from the last video with some basic understandings or in-depth understandings, however far you get into it, that you will have your signal flow will become very fine-tuned, you know, and even to the point that you've taken it as much as reading you've done to your understanding, and there will become a point where you'll understand those concepts of what's happening to where you will spend much more time in your processing and not thinking about why you're processing or what this plugin does or things like that. I hate that kind of stuff when I get some kind of plugin and it's got knobs and stuff and I don't know what the hell it's doing. I got no idea what the code is written. I don't know what the circuit was simulated, but it kind of sounds cool. And now I got to sit around and try to figure out, well, what's going to happen when I mix that together? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just cool, and that's great. But a lot of times when you're mixing a lot of things together, that something might sound really cool, that violin or that guitar all by itself, but when it goes into the mix, all the crap that it's putting into the rest of the mix, what's the end result of that, you know? And, you know, a lot of times that if you don't understand that, you don't hear all the muddiness that's caused by it because you really didn't understand what was happening there to begin with. So anyway, I hope you investigate into that a little bit, but it is it can be a very complex issue, but it certainly can help you to, you know, to have a little bit better understanding of your signal flow and a micro analysis of it. And you might not build, you know, huge plugins or DAWs or anything like that, but at least when you're dealing with them, that you understand that it is a very pertinent part of your signal flow in your production and in your signal processing. And to investigate it some, you know, look into it some, spend some time, you know, a few weekends, a month, you know, and kind of look into it and check it out. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope it wasn't too complex and opened some doors. Peace, hope, love.